From New York, this is Democracy Now!
Hong Kong people do understand that we have to take to the streets. We have to continue our protest in order to get our cause be accepted by the government, in order to get the extradition bill be withdrawn, and also Carrie Lam to step down.
Up to 2 million people filled the streets of Hong Kong in the territory's largest protest in decades. The protests have forced the suspension of the extradition bill, but activists are now demanding Hong Kong's top official resign as well. We'll go to Hong Kong for the latest. Then 16 Shots, a new documentary, looks at the 2014 Chicago police killing of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald and Chicago's cover-up.
There is police dash cam video that contradicts the official story.
What we saw was, in our opinion, a first-degree murder.
There's an escalation of involvement from people across the city.
Justice for us is Jason Van Dyke being convicted of the murder of Laquan McDonald.
We'll speak to Rick Rowley, the director of 16 Shots. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Hong Kong, as many as 2 million people took to the streets Sunday for another mass demonstration against a proposed bill that would allow the extradition of Hong Kong residents to mainland China, which critics say would infringe on Hong Kong's independence and the legal and human rights of Hong Kong residents and visitors. Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, suspended the bill and apologized for her handling of the situation, but protesters are calling for its full withdrawal. Protesters also called for the resignation of Carrie Lam. Meanwhile, prominent pro-democracy activist 22-year-old Joshua Wong was released Monday after a month behind bars and has vowed to join the protest movement.
Hong Kong people will not keep silence under the suppression of President Xi and the Chief Executive Carrie Lam. Carrie Lam must step down. Otherwise, I believe in the next few weeks, before the 22nd anniversary of Hong Kong transfer of sovereignty, more and more Hong Kong people, not only 1 million or 2 million people, will come and join our fight until the day we get back our basic human rights and freedom.
We'll have more on Hong Kong after headlines. Iran's Atomic Energy Agency has announced it's just 10 days away from exceeding the limit of enriched uranium stockpile permitted under the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Iran started rolling back its compliance with the landmark agreement last month following the U.S. withdrawal and the reimposition of sanctions last year. On Saturday, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani reiterated his ultimatum to European nations and other signatories that they must show, quote, positive signals in upholding the pact for Iran to maintain its commitment as well. This comes as the United States continues to blame Iran for attacking 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman Thursday without offering any new evidence that they did. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the U.S. is considering a full range of options. Some of the U.S. claims have been directly contradicted by the Japanese owner of one of the tankers. Iran has denied any involvement and accused the Trump administration of trying to sabotage diplomacy for fueling the threat of war. Reports emerged Friday of a 6-year-old migrant girl from India who died of heat stroke in the Arizona desert last week after being smuggled into the U.S. with her mother and 3 other Indian nationals. Border Patrol found the body of Gurpreet Kaur on Wednesday near Lukeville, Arizona. The temperature hovered around 108 degrees Fahrenheit that day. The girl's mother had gone to search for water while she stayed with 2 of other migrants in her group. The volunteer humanitarian group No More Deaths, which provides water and other assistance to migrants crossing the harsh Sonoran Desert, tweeted, quote, asylum seekers have been forcibly turned away from the nearby Lukeville port of entry. We need water, not walls. A new report by the New York Times has revealed the youngest child to be ripped from their family after migrating to the U.S. via the southern border was a 4-month-old baby. The child, Konstantin Mutu, was taken by U.S. officials under Trump's zero-tolerance family separation policy and put in a foster home. His father was put in an immigrant prison before being deported to his native Romania. Konstantin has since been reunited with his parents and has displayed signs of emotional and developmental issues. His parents say he's not walking or talking. In more immigration news, Immigration and Customs Enforcement has put 5,200 immigrants in quarantine after they were exposed to mumps or chicken pox. 39 immigrant prisons around the U.S. are affected by the outbreak. In South America, power has been partially restored after a massive blackout hit Argentina, Uruguay, and parts of Paraguay Sunday. Officials say the unprecedented blackout occurred after a failure in the transmission of electricity from a hydroelectric dam that feeds a regional electrical grid. Argentina's vowed to fully investigate the reasons for the system's failure. President Trump lashed out at the New York Times after it published a piece on Saturday saying the U.S. is ramping up cyber intrusions into Russia's electric power grid. Trump tweeted the New York Times report is a, quote, virtual act of treason. The report asserts the U.S. is deploying new cyber tools in a warning to Russian President Vladimir Putin over interference in U.S. elections. The report also said military and intelligence officials have avoided sharing the full details of such operations with Trump in case he countermands them or discloses the information with foreign officials. India's imposed new tariffs on 28 U.S. products in response to the Trump administration's hike on steel and aluminum taxes, as well as the decision to withdraw India's preferential trade status earlier this month. The new tariffs will affect goods including apples, almonds, lentils, and chemical products, and in some cases will be as high as 70%. In Guatemala, voters headed to the polls Sunday in highly contested presidential and congressional elections. As votes continue to be tallied, former First Lady Sandra Torres is leading in the presidential race with around a quarter of the votes, but a runoff is expected in August between the two leading candidates. Torres has been plagued by accusations of money laundering and ties to drug traffickers. Critics have warned of widespread corruption leading up to the elections. Telma Adana, a former attorney general who helped prosecute hundreds of cases against Guatemala's political and business elite, was believed to be a favorite to win before being banned from the elections over what many believe are trumped-up allegations of embezzlement and tax fraud, which she denies. Aldana has left the country after facing death threats and a warrant for her arrest. In Sudan, ousted former President Omar al-Bashir made his first public appearance Sunday since his overthrow in April. He was taken to the prosecutor's office, where he was charged on several counts of corruption, including accepting illegal gifts and hoarding foreign money. Al-Bashir was charged in May for his involvement in the killing of anti-government demonstrators during the months-long popular uprising that led to his ouster. Protesters are continuing to demand the country's ruling military hand over power to a civilian authority. In Somalia, a car bombing Saturday near a checkpoint at the presidential palace in Mogadishu killed at least 8 people, wounded another 25. The militant group al-Shabaab claimed responsibility. Al-Shabaab also claimed responsibility for the death of 10 Kenyan police officers who were killed Saturday after their vehicle struck an improvised explosive device near the border with Somalia. In Spain, Barcelona's leftist mayor, Ada Colau, was sworn in Saturday for another term after she managed to keep her post despite losing by less than 5,000 votes to a Catalan separatist during last month's European parliamentary elections. Mayor Colau was re-elected by City Hall representatives after members of the Socialist Party and representatives backed by former French Prime Minister and Barcelona mayoral candidate Manuel Valls voted for her in an effort to prevent the Catalan separatist from becoming mayor. President Trump will officially kick off his 2020 presidential bid Tuesday with a massive rally in Orlando, Florida. The rally comes just over 4 years after Trump's now infamous descent down a golden escalator at the Trump Tower to announce his 2016 candidacy. Meanwhile, media outlets are reporting the Trump campaign has fired several pollsters after leaked numbers showed him trailing former Vice President Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders in several battleground states. In Maryland, police are investigating the death of Zoe Spears, a 23-year-old black transgender woman who's at least the 10th known case of deadly violence against trans women this year, all of them African-American. Spears' body was found on the street with several gunshot wounds last Thursday in Fairmount Heights, just outside Washington, D.C., only a few blocks away from the site of another fatal shooting in March of a black trans woman named Ashanti Carman. The two women were friends, and the police are trying to determine if their murders are connected. Ruby Corrado, executive director of the LGBTQ Community Center Casa Ruby and a close friend of Zoe Spears, said Spears moved out of her apartment fearing for her safety following Ashanti Carman's murder. The fallout for prosecutors in the Central Park 5 case continues. Lead prosecutor Elizabeth Lederer resigned from her lecturing position at Columbia Law School after a petition started by the Black Law Students Association calling for her firing gathered over 10,000 signatures. This comes after former prosecutor Linda Fairstein was dropped by her publisher and forced to step down from several nonprofit boards as well as Vassar College's Board of Trustees due to renewed public scrutiny following the release of a Netflix series about the case, which saw 5 Harlem teenagers of color wrongfully accused and convicted for a rape in 1989. To see our hour interview with Ava DuVernay, director of When They See Us, go to our website at democracynow.org. And in Arizona, Phoenix's mayor and police chief have both apologized after a video showing officers pointing guns and yelling at a black family outside a Family Dollar store caused widespread outrage over the weekend. The officers say they were responding to a report of shoplifting when they drew their firearms and started screaming orders using profane language at a father, a pregnant woman carrying a baby, and a 4-year-old girl. The girl had left the store with a doll, which was not paid for.
You recording it?
Yeah, I'm recording it.
Put your hands up. I don't give a Put your hands up. Hands up.
The woman can be heard saying she's unable to hold her hands up because she's holding her baby and that she's pregnant. The parents say the police officers violated their civil rights and are filing a $10 million lawsuit. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show in Hong Kong, where as many as 2 million people took to the streets Sunday calling for the withdrawal of a bill to allow the extradition of Hong Kong residents to mainland China. Protesters also called for the resignation of Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, and other top officials who push for the extradition bill. Facing mounting protests, Lam has apologized for her handling of the legislation as an indefinitely delayed a vote on the bill, but the bill has not been fully withdrawn. Sunday's protest came days after riot police fired tear gas, rubber bullets, and pepper spray at tens of thousands of demonstrators. The recent protests are the largest Hong Kong has seen since before Britain's handover of Hong Kong and China in 1997. Since then, Hong Kong has operated under a different legal and political system as mainland China, a setup known as one country, two systems. Critics of the extradition bill say it would infringe on Hong Kong's independence and the legal and human rights of Hong Kong residents, as well as the people visiting Hong Kong. Meanwhile, one of the most prominent pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong, 22-year-old Joshua Wong, was released after a month behind bars. In 2014, he helped lead the Umbrella Movement, which organized protests in Hong Kong. Wong vowed today to join the protest movement.
People will not keep silence under the suppression of President Xi and the Chief Executive Carrie Lam. Carrie Lam must step down. Otherwise, I believe in the next few weeks, before the 22nd anniversary of Hong Kong transfer of sovereignty, more and more Hong Kong people, not only 1 million or 2 million people, will come and join our fight until the day we get back our basic human rights and freedom.
We're joined now by two guests. In Hong Kong, Nathan Law is with us, pro-democracy activist who also helped lead the Umbrella Movement. He and Joshua Wong have been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for their activism. He was with Joshua just after his release today. And here in New York, Minky Worden, director of global initiatives at Human Rights Watch. Worden lived and worked in Hong Kong in the 1990s. Welcome you both to Democracy Now! Nathan, let's begin with you. Can you just describe what took place this weekend, what your demands are, and whether you feel they have been met?
Well, I think after the 2 million people marching down last Sunday, Carrie Lam did issue an apology, but it is definitely not enough. Our demand is very clear and sound. She has to retreat the proposal, she has to investigate the police brutality, and she has to step down. So I think if these demands are not met in the future, then there will be more and more protests and rallies.
Nathan, can you explain what the law is and why protesters will not accept it?
Well, Hong Kong's one country, two system with China, one of the most important feature is that we have separated legal system. In Hong Kong, we have independent judges, fair trial, and also rule of law. These are not found in China. And if this law is passed, then it allows China to extradite people in Hong Kong with fabricated cases, and they have to be extradited back to China to face unfair trial. So it imposes dangers to all of us.
And can you talk about the police response to these massive protests? Protesters are putting the numbers at somewhere this weekend around 2 million people in the streets of Hong Kong.
Well, the most brutal repression to the protesters happened on last Wednesday, when we have gathering outside the legislative complex, where the general meeting of our lawmaking body take place, and the police try to disperse people with tear gas and rubber bullets. And these are unprecedented forces and definitely unproportional. We could see that police there were out of control. They were beating people who were lying down on the ground without any resistance. They were firing their gunfire to the head of the protesters. These are violating every ordinance or every rule that they have to obey in order to protect the safety of citizens.
On Saturday, Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, addressed the people of Hong Kong. This is what she said.
I feel deep sorrow and regret that the deficiencies in our work and various other factors have stirred up substantial controversies and dispute in society following the relatively calm periods of the past 2 years, disappointing many people. We will adopt the most sincere and humble attitude to accept criticisms and make improvements so that we can continue to connect with the people of Hong Kong.
Nathan Law, your response to the chief executive of Hong Kong.
Well, I do believe that this press conference, the performance of Carrie Lam, made a lot more people coming down to the street. Even though she said she will pause the bill, but she also said that the bill was with good intention, with good purpose. It's just people don't listen to her, don't understand the bill. So these kind of reframing or rhetoric lies that Carrie Lam said during the press conference indeed made a lot of people more angry. And she also defended the police brutality, saying that the protest on Wednesday was also a riot so that it could legitimize the suppression or the police brutality they have been taking. And these things are also really upset all these citizens, so that our number of people marching down to the street increased from 1 million to 2 million within a week. So Carrie Lam must be the one who made all this happen.
Can you talk about China's overall role in this? Xi Jinping was in Tajikistan on Saturday, celebrating his 66th birthday with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Beijing won't let Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam step down, even if she wants to, some say. Your thoughts on this, Nathan Law, and what this means for the mainland as well?
Well, for Carrie Lam and for the Beijing government, they always said that it's not the initiative from Beijing, it's the initiative from Carrie. And we can, well, as the information got from different sources, we also know that it was initiative from Carrie, and she tried to push forward the proposal so that the Beijing's power in Hong Kong could be more centralized and strengthen its grip to Hong Kong about money and also arresting political dissidents and so on. But she misjudged how public react, and the public anger is way much larger than she expected. So I think even though the Beijing government is backing her, but there's possibility that the Beijing government, if they wanted to preserve their reputation or show that they are lenient and they are rational, they may sacrifice Carrie Lam if needed.
I want to go back to Hong Kong pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong, who is just released from jail today. As he spoke, Nathan, you were standing right there next to him.
It's time for us to urge Carrie Lam to withdraw the extradition law proposal, and it's her responsibility to step down and to face how 2 million people already joined the fight, and urge her to bear the political responsibility. In the future, I will join the fight, and I hope more people can join our protest.
Can you comment on what Joshua Wong's his release just released earlier today, and the significance of this, why he was imprisoned, and what it means for the whole movement?
Well, Joshua was locked in jail because of his participation in the Umbrella Movement. So after almost a month's jail sentence, he came out, and he immediately went to the Admiralty and also the protest sites to see what's going on. Because in the prison, you've got very limited resources of information. So I think he has to keep up the pace and know more about things in order to make a good judgment on the strategy of the movement. But at the end of the day, he's very concerned, and we Demosisto will continue to fight, and with his participation, our fight would be more stronger and more firm.
And why is it called the Umbrella Movement? And can you describe your intentions in founding it?
Yeah, the Umbrella Movement happened 5 years ago, and it is named because people were very peaceful, and when they faced the police using the pepper spray, they only block it with umbrella. So you could see a scene of a list or a line of umbrellas facing the police, and the police was spraying pepper spray. So the name of Umbrella Movement started from this scene, very iconic one.
And overall, where you think the G20 is happening later this month. President Trump will be meeting with Xi Jinping. What do you want to see come out of that? And can you comment on the U.S.-China relationship and how it affects what's happening in Hong Kong?
Well, Secretary Pompeo just said that President Trump will discuss Hong Kong issue with Xi Jinping when they meet at G20. So I think it is a good opportunity for the U.S. to state that they have massive interest in Hong Kong, and they share the same liberal and universal values with Hong Kong people, so that we want China to really treasure the demands of Hong Kong people and stop suppressing them. I think it is a very important message, because it is not only about Hong Kong's interests, but the interests of the whole free world and the interests of America. So I think if President Trump indeed meets President Xi in G20, is not only about economy, it's not only about trade, but is about something that way much more important.
Nathan Law is a pro-democracy activist who has also helped lead the Umbrella Movement. Both he and Joshua Wong have been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for their activism. Nathan, I want you to stay with us, but I also want to bring in Minky Worden of Human Rights Watch. You've been following this movement in detail. You lived in Hong Kong. If you, too, can talk about the significance of a movement that some described it as a failed movement until now.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that Joshua Wong getting out of prison today is a very significant moment. He published an article that had echoes of the letter from the Birmingham jail, and I think that helps put this movement in the context of protest movements worldwide, but also through history. And the Umbrella Movement, when it happened in 2014, was a landmark movement of especially young people who weren't even born at the time of the Hong Kong handover, standing up and saying, we understand what makes Hong Kong special. We understand that only in Hong Kong, with our rule of law, press freedom, religious freedom, our ability to protest freely, that we understand these rights and freedoms are very precious, and we're prepared to stand up and defend them. The Umbrella Movement itself, Nathan Law was actually elected to the legislature in a landslide. He was the youngest legislator when elected, and yet within a year, he was thrown out of the legislature. And that was a series of moves that have been made by the Hong Kong government to assert control of the legislature, right, throwing out elected leaders. And I think there's been a question of whether there was a legacy from the umbrella movement. And last Sunday, with 1 million people turning out into the streets peacefully, and yesterday with as many as 2 million people turning out, I think you can see that the umbrella movement has had an enduring legacy that continues to this day.
Can you talk about the extradition law, more about it? What seems to be the latest in a blurring of lines between mainland China and Hong Kong. And how much control, for people to understand, does China exert over Hong Kong, and where you see this all headed?
Yes. So the extradition law is the latest in a series of moves from China to undermine Hong Kong's autonomy and human rights. And I think if you were to look at all of the things that distinguish Hong Kong from China, religious freedom, a functioning rule of law, a judicial system that is largely independent, a free press is absolutely essential, and the ability to protest. All of these rights and freedoms have been under steady assault from China, but in a way that the international community really wasn't paying a lot of attention. Certainly, it caused enormous fear and concern in Hong Kong, but in the 22 years since the handover from Britain to China, the defense of human rights and the rule of law in Hong Kong has largely been left to Hong Kong people. And every time there has been a crisis like this, they have stood up. What the extradition law does that is so pernicious is that it would actually legalize kidnapping. It would, I think in recent years, we've seen the abduction of publishers and businessmen. There was a businessman who was abducted from the Four Seasons. So The Four Seasons Hotel in Hong Kong, yes. A businessman was abducted, and 5 publishers. And then several of them made forced confessions. So I think for Hong Kong people, they see this as a fundamental assault to the values, their core values, where you have the right of due process, for example, in the courts. So the extradition law itself could legalize kidnapping.
Why is China pushing this at this time, and what does this mean for Xi Jinping?
Well, I don't know that there's evidence that this is coming from China. Hong Kong is supposed to be an autonomous system. It has an enormous bureaucracy. There's a big question of whether this was the Hong Kong leader, Carrie Lam, who is not elected by Hong Kong people, moving a piece of legislation where she could show Beijing how much she was in control. As Nathan Law said, it's backfired spectacularly. And I think the important question is what's going to happen next. Carrie Lam has said that they will suspend the law but not withdraw it. There are parallels in recent Hong Kong history where the previous chief executive moved a piece of legislation on subversion that would have undermined human rights in Hong Kong. In that situation, 500,000 people took to the street. The law was withdrawn, and ultimately the chief executive was tossed out of office. So I think there's a parallel in recent Hong Kong history, but the concern is now Xi Jinping is in China.
Your final thoughts, Nathan Law.
Well, definitely, this kind of legalizing kidnapping indeed impose a lot of threat to Hong Kong people. And that is why we have 2 million people marching down to the street on the Sunday. And we hope that by continuing our pressure to the government, they could really listen to it, even though they are not democratically elected. But the power of people must be shown, and the power of people must be respected.
Nathan Law, we want to thank you for being with us, pro-democracy activist in Hong Kong, who's been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, and Minky Worden, Director of Global Initiatives at Human Rights Watch. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, the story of Laquan McDonald and the Chicago cover-up. Stay with us.
I can hear my bones straining under the weight of all the lives I'm not living. My eyes can't take in all the change. People got it all arranged. Am I living? Am I dreaming? Some nights I would scream alone in my little lovely cozy private zone. Now here I am, I'm standing here, waiting days and months to years, waiting for the shadow fades. But sometimes I wonder why did we exist? Or a lie, a lie.
All is Fair by Denise Ho. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman as we turn to a remarkable new documentary that just premiered on Showtime. The film is called 16 Shots. It examines the 2014 murder of African-American teenager Laquan McDonald in Chicago. This is the trailer.
Chicago Police Department averages maybe 30 police shootings a year.
I think it's a level of people being desensitized from the violence.
When you look at the police reports that were signed off, it's a justified shooting.
And if somebody gets near you with an open knife...
I'm sorry, but that's a threat.
What the local news put out there.
An individual with a knife coming at the officer.
That is not the story. This boy been shot, and there's a lot of bullet holes in him.
I'm just going home.
There is police dash cam video that contradicts the official story.
What we saw was, in our opinion, a first-degree murder.
There's an escalation of involvement from people across the city.
Justice for us is Jason Van Dyke being convicted of the murder of Laquan McDonald.
He was their son. He was their brother. He was them.
Chicago has not had to reckon with what happens when you don't hold folks in law enforcement accountable.
Almost overnight, the power and legitimacy of city institutions cratered.
There's 86 minutes that are missing.
The Laquan case was not a cover-up. It's a story of our racial nightmare in this country.
MP is acquitted.
The trailer to 16 Shots, the new documentary on Showtime. Former Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke was found guilty in 2018 of second-degree murder, sentenced to 6 years and 9 months in prison for McDonald's murder. Van Dyke was also found guilty on 16 counts of aggravated battery, 1 count for each of the 16 bullets he fired at McDonald. Well, Democracy Now! Recently spoke with Rick Rowley, director of 16 Shots. I began by asking him to lay out how this film chronicles this case, beginning with the day Laquan McDonald was murdered.
We show the moment that every single actor along this process kind of steps in. From the beat cops who initially respond, the first thing they do is they erase. It seems very clear. They destroy evidence. They erase this surveillance video that's from a Burger King that's across the street. 80 minutes are just erased off the machine. They shoo away witnesses. They take some civilian witnesses back to City Hall, and those witnesses describe to us, for the first time on camera in this film, they describe being threatened by officers and being coerced into trying to say that they didn't see what they saw. Immediately what happens is the spokesman for the Fraternal Order of Police, the police union in Chicago, comes out and he creates the first version of this story. And that's a story that goes out to the press everywhere. And that is almost always the first and last story. I mean, there are 30 to 60 police shootings a year in Chicago, every week or every other week. In the course of my lifetime, that's thousands of people who've been shot, and the cases all end in the same way: a small note in the end of the press, and then we turn the page.
I want to go back to Burger King, where the police come into the Burger King that has closed-circuit TV. They don't have a warrant. What do?
They demand access to the surveillance system. They don't have a warrant. They don't have any legal rights to go in and seize the equipment, but they do anyway. They get the night manager to give them the password in there. We can see them on the surveillance footage, messing around with the computer system. And the next day, 87 minutes from all of the cameras is just missing. And we know we actually did a bunch of research. We contacted the engineers who install these systems. This just doesn't ever happen. Not only is it missing, but there's multiple redundant backups on that machine that are all also missing. So, it seems evident that the officers on the scene there, erased that footage and just made it disappear.
Rick, there were witnesses, non-police witnesses at this late-night killing. These are the witnesses in your film to the shooting. Alma Benitez, but first, Xavier and Jose Torres.
I don't want to talk bad about all police officers because they're not all bad. I have a lot of friends that are police officers. But, after seeing this, I lost pretty much the trust in the police. We're traveling northbound on Pulaski. I was actually the first car that pulled up at the scene.
I had just barely come out from work. I was headed to Burger King. I see a guy running next on my window. He was getting chased by the cops. They were chasing him.
We had the street lights, so we were able to, get a good view of what was going on. There were a lot of police officers, and it just seemed like he was just trying to get away from what was going on.
The first shots came in, and he dropped.
Shots and saw him drop. He literally dropped.
And there was small pulse. I seen Laquan McDonald move. It didn't seem like he was getting up. It just seemed like he was in pain. But that's when all the shots started coming in.
He was on the ground, still more shots came at him.
While the gunshots were going in, his just body kept jumping. You could tell he didn't have no life in there no more. And next thing I remember is yelling, "Stop shooting, he's dead already."
I was kind of upset, and I said, "Why are they still shooting him? He's on the ground."
From what we've seen, he wasn't posing any type of threat.
The detectives called me over, and they took us to the precinct. They separated us in 3 different rooms.
They brought me into a small office, and they started questioning me and asking me what happened.
I talked to several detectives, not one, and they kept asking me the same questions over and over again. What did you see? How many gunshots did you hear? The more I kept telling them of what I saw, they were trying to make me... They would tell me stuff like, well, we're watching the video and your story does not match. And I said, well, if it doesn't match, then and you have a video, what am I doing here? And they said, well, it's not good to lie. They really wanted me to change the story about how many shots I had heard. If I didn't tell them what they wanted to hear, I definitely thought I was going to go to jail.
That's Alma Benitez talking about what she saw, and Jose and Xavier Torres before her. Now, compare these eyewitness reports to the spokesperson and the head of the Fraternal Order of Police.
Clearly, Pat Camden arrives on the scene, and he immediately packages for the press the official police response, which is that this was a violent offender who was waving a knife in a menacing way and had to be shot. The stunning thing is that even after the video is released, even after Pat Camden, Dean Angelo, who's the spokesman for the FOP, Dean Angelo, the former head of the FOP at the time, and Gary McCarthy, the police chief, even after they saw the video, they looked at it and said that this looks like a justified shooting.
But Van Dyke was not the first officer on the scene. Yeah,
one of the interesting sort of poignant parts of the story is that the first responding officers, they're responding to a 911 call saying that there's a kid who might be breaking into trucks in a truck yard. They show up. It's Officer Gaffney and Officer McElligott, and they do everything kind of by the book, as you would expect, law enforcement officers to deal with it. They don't provoke McDonald. They see he has a knife. They follow behind him 10 paces back with their lights on, and they call in and ask for a taser, for the only kind of non-lethal enforcement they have. They follow him for a significant amount of time. More and more officers are arriving. The taser is on its way, and then suddenly Van Dyke's car pulls up. He jumps out of his car, and in under 6 seconds, he's unloading his clip into Laquan McDonald. And so these officers have now just witnessed an atrocity, and they go and they all have to make their statements. So the statements there are 9 other officers on the scene. Most of the statements say that tell a completely unfactual account of what happened, that Laquan was waving the knife, advancing on Officer Van Dyke, which obviously is just a lie. Several of the officers say, I didn't see anything. The officer who's driving the car that has the dash cam in it claims that they didn't see anything happen. So that was, the greatest act of resistance probably that was imaginable for an officer at that time, knowing that even if you tell the truth, nothing's going to happen to this officer because nothing ever has in the 180-year history of the Chicago Police Department, and that the only outcome is going to be that you're going to end your career potentially and put yourself in danger. So, so anyway, all of the officer statements kind of corroborate this completely untrue story that Laquan was the aggressor.
Let's go to the clip. It begins with the FOP spokesperson. Mind you, none of these guys are in power in office right now. Pat Camden, and then to the head of the Fraternal Order of Police, also not there. And ultimately, the police chief, Gary McCarthy, was fired as well.
As you look at something frame by frame, again, without the emotions that are involved, you can draw a conclusion. My conclusion was, the officer did what he had to do to protect himself.
I see a situation that is gotten away. I don't know where everybody's head is at in that situation.
There's a knife. I'm sorry, but that's a threat. If somebody gets near you, within 21 feet of you, with an open knife, you could die.
As you saw and I've seen, Laquan McDonald was murdered. This family wants justice to be served, and justice for us is Jason Van Dyke being convicted of the murder of Laquan McDonald.
Which of these people is not like the other? Which of these people just doesn't belong? And that's Pastor Marvin Hunter at the end, the grand uncle of Laquan McDonald.
Yeah, it is one of the remarkable things is that in spite of all the facts that we have about this case, in spite of the video, in spite of all of the evidence that's come forward, those facts are not enough to secure the narrative. Even in the face of those facts, there is another story, a competing story that is very powerful in this country and that's built on racial fear. And that is what was being mobilized on the other side of this sort of discourse. So you see that unfold in the trial. The defense invokes it constantly. There are these amazing moments where Dan Herbert, the defense attorney for Officer Van Dyke, talks about this as a horror film. He says, imagine you're watching a horror film and the monster suddenly turns and looks at you, and then the music starts to play. That's what happened here. So he's casting Laquan McDonald as a monster. Dean Angelo says, the former head of the FOP, says to Jackie Suen, the producer and interviewer, people need to recognize no one's accepting the fact that what we need to do is go after that monster who doesn't belong in the street with you or my wife or my daughter. Basically, with white women, like invoking the oldest nightmare, American racial nightmare there is.
So October 20th, 2014 is the day Laquan McDonald is gunned down by Jason Van Dyke. Again, Van Dyke then controls the narrative, or the FOP does, by saying that he felt his life was threatened. No one saw otherwise, so this was just par for the course. Mm-hmm. Talk about then how this case developed, how it changed from that night.
Yeah, so that would have been the end of it, ordinarily, in any one of these thousands of other cases where this has happened. But two things happened that weren't expected. First, a whistleblower in law enforcement got in touch with investigative journalist Jamie Calvin and told him there's a video out there. There's a video, and it's horrific, and he was worried that it might be destroyed if no one started asking for it. The other parallel thing that happened was the family began to ask questions. So Pastor Marvin Hunter, the great uncle of Laquan McDonald, when Laquan's body was delivered to the funeral home, the funeral home called him up and told him, in the news they're saying he was shot once in the chest, but he's full of bullet holes. So they took pictures and they took those to an attorney, and they began the process of exploring civil litigation around the case, which ended up opening a separate kind of line of inquiry that helped rip the case open.
Rick Rowley, director of the new documentary 60 16 shots. We'll be back with him in 30 seconds.
Gotta change around here. Gotta change around here. Can't go on this way. Things gotta change around here. Say it loud, say it clear. Things gonna change around here. Fingers on the trigger around here. Fingers on the trigger around here.
Change by Mavis Staples. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman as we continue our discussion with Rick Rowley, director of 16 Shots. It just premiered on Showtime. This isn't about just public officials changing their minds or video coming out from an insider in the police department. This is about people on the ground who couldn't take it anymore. Explain how that movement built. Who is Will Calloway?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's definitely true. That one of the essential processes through this is that everyone inside the system is playing by the rules of a game that's existed for over 100 years, and they know that they're going to win because they've always won. But what they don't realize is that outside in the street and in culture, the rules of that whole game are changing. They live in a different world by the end of this case than they did at the beginning, and they live in a different world because there's a social movement out there that changed that world. And Charlene Carruthers, the former head of BYP 100. And Will Calloway, an activist who became involved with this case from the very beginning, are responsible in a large way for those changes that happened. So Will was an activist working on police issues on the Rekia Boyd shooting, which happened in Chicago a year earlier. When he read Jamie Calvin's piece that revealed that there was a video out there, he FOIA'd for the video. Along with a bunch of other media outlets, like a couple dozen media outlets FOIA'd for the video. All the FOIAs were denied. Ongoing investigation. It's a typical logic that is deployed whenever people want to keep things hidden. Everyone else dropped it. Will didn't drop it. He sued the city. He sued the city and he won. It was another unprecedented moment for transparency in the city.
And so talk about what happened next. The judge ruled it would have to be released within a few days.
Yeah. So suddenly the city realizes that this entire machine that they had faith that would continue to function had fallen apart. It had just exploded. And so the state's attorney, Anita Alvarez, immediately brings murder charges against Officer Van Dyke. This is the first time an officer's ever been charged for murdering a black citizen. A day before the video is released. Then the video is released, and it sends shockwaves through the city because this video is. There are a lot of videos of these shootings that are circulating now. Most of them are, shaky cell phone videos, partial recordings. The recording begins, partway through the encounter. This video is unparalleled in its clarity. It's a locked-off shot from the dash cam of a police car. And you see every second of Officer Van Dyke's interactions with Laquan McDonald. You see his car pull up, him jump out of it, and begin to fire. There isn't a second before the video starts. You see everything, and because it's happening on a street with the lane lines painted, it might as well have been taking place on graph paper. You can see that Laquan is moving away. You can see that he's no threat. It has and you can see his body lying on the ground while Van Dyke continues to shoot into him. It's unprecedented in its clarity and in the horror that you see in it.
All of this is playing out before the video is released in the mayoral re-election of Rahm Emanuel. And explain what happened exactly when the video dropped in the process of his campaign. And also a settlement the family made that people did not know about for quite some time.
Yeah, so the city, we know from internal email and communications that have been, that journalists sued for and have been released, that the city was obsessed with this case. All of Mayor Rahm Emanuel's senior staff were discussing it. They were, circulating stories about it. They were talking about the video, but there was no lawsuit filed about it yet. So Rahm Emanuel is in a very tight runoff and he didn't win an outright majority in the first election. It's in a runoff. It's very close. It looks like he might lose, and this video could be released at any moment by the family if they decide to bring charges. So the lawyer for the city, the mayor's office sends their lawyer to make a $5 million settlement with Laquan McDonald's family before any charges have been filed. There's no lawsuit. It's a preemptive settlement, $5 million to delay the release of the video till after the election is over.
So Anita Alvarez, you and Jackie Suen interview several times, the state's attorney who does not bring charges against Jason Van Dyke, even though she clearly has seen this video. What did she have to gain by not bringing charges?
Well, it was great, because when heads really started to roll around this case and the institutions inside the city turned against each other, people began briefing against each other, and so we were able to get much more candid interviews from everyone around. It's a great moment to be a documentary filmmaker when that happens. But we interviewed Anita Alvarez while she was still state's attorney, and she makes it very clear. She admits that she saw the video right away, but she says it's very hard to prosecute police officers, and we thought we would lose. But once the video is going to be released, and they know it's going to be released, she's worried about civil unrest in the city. She's worried there'll be riots. So she charges Van Dyke with murder the day before the video is released to try to preempt the anger that everyone knows is going to roll out into the street.
So, Rick Rowley, set up this next clip.
Charges have been brought against Van Dyke the day before this video is released. The whole city doesn't know what to expects civil unrest. The police are on high alert. People are talking about riots and the movement. When the whole city clusters around their phones and their computers to watch the video the moment is released. And when they see it, it is shocking, it is graphic, it is horrific, and the protesters pour out into the streets on Black Friday, the busiest shopping day of the year, and they shut down
the day after Thanksgiving.
The day after Thanksgiving, and they shut down the Magnificent Mile in downtown Chicago.
This clip begins with Charlene Carruthers.
He was shot 16 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. He was shot 16 times.
He was their son. He was their brother. He was them.
16 shots! 16 shots!
How many times I ran from the police growing up in the city? How many times that I was put in a position where Chicago police pulled guns on me? So when I saw Laquan, I saw me.
Will Calloway. So when I saw Laquan, I saw me.
Yeah, that is that's a sentiment that was felt throughout the kind of movement out there. Will has described it at different times as a kind of divine justice or divine poetry, that Laquan McDonald, a figure who was so marginalized in the city that he was practically invisible up until the moment of his death, ended up taking down the most powerful people in the city of Chicago.
So the trial takes place September of 2018. Describe the moment of the verdict.
The trial has been this amazing kind of public spectacle in Chicago, the focal point of the city's attention for the weeks that it happens. And as the jury is, as the case is given to the jury and they go in to deliberate, the city's on the edge of its seat. I mean, the people again are fearing riots. If there's an acquittal, when everyone is called back because there's a verdict is ready, I'm filming in front of City Hall because 100 or 200 activists have gathered in front of City Hall, and their plan is they're certain it's going to be a not guilty verdict. It's unimaginable that a police officer will be found guilty of murdering a black citizen. And so their plan is to go inside City Hall and shut it down. Shut it down if it comes back not guilty, and be arrested. So we're standing outside. The whole group is leaning into their cell phones, playing the video over megaphones, or the audio over megaphones. It is this incredible moment. And as the verdict is read, first, guilty of second-degree murder, and then the 16 counts, one for every shot. Shot 1, guilty. Shot 2, guilty. Shot 3, guilty. As those shots are being read out, people are weeping. They're in tears. Something unimaginable has happened to them. It's like a tear has opened in the fabric of political reality, and something else is visible on the other side of it. I have seldom seen moments of that kind of intense public intimacy. I was incredibly grateful to be able to be there and see it. But there was a feeling amongst everyone there that a page had been turned, and that we were in a new moment that we were going to all have to find out what it meant.
Ultimately, though, while he was found guilty of each of those 16 shots, while Jason Van Dyke was found guilty of second-degree murder, his sentence.
So months later, in January of this year, the two things happened days apart. First, there was a conspiracy trial for the other officers on the scene, where they were charged with conspiring to cover up this murder. All of them were acquitted. The next day, Van Dyke was sentenced, and the Judge Gahn, decided not to consider the 16 counts of aggravated battery, one for each shot, only consider the second-degree murder, and gave him 6.5 years, eligible for release in 3 years. And we talked to the jurors who felt betrayed. I mean, they went in there. So each count of aggravated battery carries 6 to 30 years per count. They thought that they were giving a verdict that was going to mean Van Dyke was going to jail for the rest of his life, and instead it was shortened to less time than. I mean, there are hundreds of people in Cook County Jail right now awaiting trial for more than 3 years because they can't afford the $500 it would take to make bail.
And so what do you think is the lesson today as the activists continue in the streets of Chicago, and what this means for the country as Showtime broadcasts your documentary?
I mean, there's two things that cut through this for me. The first is, the scale, the massive scale of the cover-up. I mean, this is not a scandal. This is not aberrant behavior. This isn't 3 people in a room deciding that they're going to clear this one bad officer. This is every institution in the city being complicit in this in some way or another, in small ways or large ways. The other lesson is that for all of the strengths of this machine, it broke down. That wall of silence was shattered in this case, and it was shattered because dozens of people at crucial moments came forward and took brave stands and broke it, and also because of the sustained attention and pressure of movements. I mean, this is a story arc that's 4 years long. People stayed on this. They stayed in the street. They stayed active, and they kept pushing this. And so that I'm in awe of the people of Chicago and of the journalists and the social movements there who maintain the pressure throughout and manage to win victories that have been elusive in every other city in this country.
Rick Rowley, director of the new documentary 16 Shots. It just premiered and is available on Showtime. Rick was nominated for an Academy Award for the film Dirty Wars. And that does it for our show. Congratulations to Democracy Now!'s general manager Julie Crosby and her partner Rebecca Wallach on the birth of their baby, Ryan Joseph Crosby Wallach. Welcome to the world. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Tammy Warrenoff, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Honey Massoud, Charina Nadura, Tay Maria Studio, and Libby Rainey. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.